if you do want to be a camera operator in TV and film, you need 4 arms. You need 2 arms to push yourself. If you're an angle chair, you need 2 arms to hold the camera. I think we're all realistic about what we can and can't do, and our career choices really reflect that. I have a Segway wheelchair. Using that, I thought that there was an opportunity to sort of base some sort of technology around it, because the fact that you can sort of move your core to move forward and backwards, and it's very, very agile. It's got a very small footprint. And so I started working with a company in London, and we've now brought this project, to life, and we're at the final stages of now being able to bring this vision and make it a reality.
Chris, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
Hi, Brooke. I'm doing really well, thanks. It's Friday.
I know. This week has honestly, I actually don't know when it started and when it's going to stop, because I just feel like all of the days are actually one big day. I've had no separate days, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. But it's good. I mean, things are really, I think, positive and encouraging now. I think I'm past being able to look at that from a new year, sort of 2024 perspective. I think there's a lot of good stuff happening, and a lot of people are really positive about this year and in general.
I always find that January is actually, I know everybody loves a whole like new year, new me. And I'm like, it's the middle of winter. I'm still going to be the same person I was at the beginning of December because I'm cold. And actually, like, I'm just going to wait until like maybe February to have like my whole new year, new me. But I really enjoyed January, to be fair. It was a good month for me.
Yeah. Brilliant. Happy days.
Yeah. So the first question that I ask everybody is, how do you refer to your disability?
Okay. Well, I mean, I can sort of relate to what Jamie Shields said to you in his podcast with you, and he's sort of referring to himself as a rhino, because I would often refer to myself as a leprechaun because I'm Irish and 4'5". But I think I just call a spade a spade. I'm deaf and disabled, so I have a condition called osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a tongue twister to start off with, but it's commonly known as brittle bone disease. So I break a lot of bones, and I'm been a full-time wheelchair user since the age of 3. And as a result of that, one of the symptoms and effects with osteogenesis is that you have hearing loss. So I've got like 50 to 60% hearing loss in both ears and my hearing aids.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but I'm sort of one of these people that I don't take. I mean, there's obviously a huge amount of discussion around language at the moment, and I am typically very accepting of how people would refer to me, and I think a lot of that just there's obviously a lot of ignorance in the best possible way. It's not that people are still using out of date terms, and don't go down a rabbit hole with you about language and everything else, but I'm very practical and understanding about the world that we live in, and the fact that there are certainly cultural differences, there are just generational differences in terms of how people refer to people within the disabled community. And I think the one thing, I mean, to sort of take you down very quickly, and that one element in particular that I think is just a bit uncomfortable for me, and has been, is the social model, and I think how I've seen that used in different contexts, and it really, I think for me, it started off just after I presented the Disability Paradox, which is a BBC documentary a couple of years ago, where I was bringing in a number of different presenters or contributors talking about the link between mental health and disability, so this ultimate pursuit of happiness. And I had one guy, Brooke, that came on and after, and he's trolling me on Twitter, and he was from the disabled community, believe it or not, and he was so he kept on saying that I shouldn't have used the word disabled or disability. It was a really negative word. Yep. And I was just sort of brushing it off at this stage, and then it sort of got like every single, I was getting so many positive comments, which are amazing, from various different people all around the world. And this guy was just trolling every single person, just trying to dismiss it. And
Yeah.
I eventually said, like, what's the deal here? And he said, well, just using the word disabled is really, bad and has negative connotations and all the rest. And he said, I teach the social model. I actually lecture the social model. And I was going, okay, right. And he then went on to say, well, look, um, and this is where I ended up blocking the guy, because he said that I'm more qualified to give my opinion because I'm more disabled than you are. and I was just like, what? Where is this coming from? I mean, it's just, yeah. And I think from there, from like, I guess my point with that is that it started a pattern of what I could see about what was being discussed around the social model, and
Mm-hmm.
this dissociative sort of use of it when people want to, and like, this is the thing, I every single time when I'm talking in public or for various different events, I will always say, like, I don't speak on behalf of the whole community. I'm just one person. I you know and this is it, and you
Yeah.
know this because within your podcast, you're brilliant at being able to give so many different voices, and allowing people the ability to voice their opinions, and you do it in a way that is extremely balanced. And I think there's a huge thing to be said for that. And when I look at some of the people though within the community that have taken the social model to this extreme,
Mm-hmm.
where it's creating this them and us culture. So
Yes.
it's very divisive. It's like, and one particular term that I've seen is this sort of society, disabled by society, where I just have these visions in my head of, you know, a group of disabled people outside a train station pointing the finger at everyone walking past in the public going, it's your fault I'm disabled. And
Mm-hmm.
that to me is what it sounds like. When we're saying disabled by society, like, I completely agree that there's so much need. And don't get me wrong, the social model is very, very good in terms of all these different things that are wrong with society, all these barriers that exist for us in terms of lack of equality,
Mm-hmm.
access to jobs, you know, there are so many good things that have to be said. But I think my point here is that it's just not perfect, and I think it's being used and bastardized in a way that I think is creating a lot of division. And it's from my experience working across advertising, TV, and film, for over 20 years, I can see that there's now this um, a hesitancy with brands to engage, and I think they're scared. They're sort of tiptoeing around us, and
Yeah.
and and as this sort of progresses and develops, I think it's quite damaging, and it just I'm always erring on the side of caution in terms of how we're viewed and represented, and for me, like, and this is the thing, like, just to highlight this in terms of how people want to be referred to, like, everyone's entitled to their own opinion
Mm-hmm.
completely. And I just, I just am very cautious of how this is being portrayed and taken to a very extreme form. So I've given a very long-winded answer about how I view my disability, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely a couple of things that have been sort of playing in the back of my mind for a long time about, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
identity. Um,
I think what you said about how you don't speak for a whole community is so important, because so often when we think about disability, like, and quite often, sometimes you're the only disabled person in the room. So it's almost like you could be the spokesperson, but actually you're not. And I could never ever claim to speak for an entire community of people that's like 1.6 million in the UK alone. Like, I do not have all of those voices, all of those opinions. I don't have them. I have one. That's a very teeny tiny portion in comparison to the 1.6 million, which is like absolutely ludicrous. And I love what you said about people being fearful, because I think you're right. I think there's almost like people don't want to get it wrong, so the answer to not getting it wrong is to actually just not ask the question, which is infuriating on one hand, because quite often you would rather be asked the question. But on the other hand, I can totally understand why people don't ask certain questions, because they're scared that they're going to get a new, oh God, I was really trying to avoid using bad language, but you're going to get a new asshole ripped if you ask the wrong person. And I can totally understand that, because it's uncomfortable. And I'm a big believer, if you're not uncomfortable, you don't grow. And like, I'm very aware of that. But it's not necessarily the nicest thing in the world to ask a genuinely curious question. All right, it might be worded a little bit wrong, and that's maybe not your fault. But there's something about them being handed your ass back to you when you were asking quite an innocent question that can make you, fearful is not necessarily the right word, but you're a bit reluctant to ask another question because you don't know what the response is going to be. So actually, in that sense, sometimes it's better just to not ask the question. And I know there have been countless times where I've done that, when it's been like, I've gone to a mechanic and they have literally ripped me a new one because I didn't know how to change my tires. Obviously, I don't know how to change my tires. I only have one hand. That was never going to be a job that I was ever going to do. So I can understand it, because there are other parts of life that it matches up to and it measures to. And I think that is also really important, to be able to say it, because it's not necessarily the easiest thing to say, is it? That actually sometimes as a community we can get it wrong too. And people are, again, very afraid of that. Well, I've got it wrong. And actually, but even if you do get it wrong, there's space for you to then grow, and you can move forward with that. But if you don't get it wrong and you just don't even ask the question, we don't move, and we don't progress.
Totally. And I think, one of the things where, especially my whole thought process in really analyzing this has been from a place of the difference that I have with my disability over others, and the considerations that I have to make in terms of my own safety and my, like, vulnerability. Like, a lot of people will say, oh no, well, we're not vulnerable and all this, but I unfortunately I am. I can't. If I get mugged, and I was like, someone tried to carjack me a number of years ago, and that was a real experience. But like, I can't. I literally cannot defend myself. I will break into small pieces, and even down to things like, when we're talking about how, within the social model that society can make these various different things, etc. I mean, I remember having a chat with a guy last year at a BFI event, and we were talking about this, and he was saying, well, look, uh, society can make all these things that you can't do accessible, and they should do. And I said, no, you can't. I mean, I can't. I'll never be able to ride a horse or ride a jet ski or hike a mountain. There are things that are just, number one, too risky, and society can't fix those things. I mean, society, if I want to hike a mountain, right, number one, there's that, you know, underlying risk that I have to start off with about any contraption that would get me up the mountain. But number two, I can't take that, because I'm a wheelchair user. I can't make that conscious decision on a Sunday morning to say, yeah, I'm going to go off and hike a mountain and do that independently. It's going to take, let's face it, a team, and anyone else who's a wheelchair user, it's going to take a team of people to make that happen. So there are things that, society just can't do, and it's just not society's fault. And I think that's where I'm coming from, that not everything is society's fault. And I think there's this broad brushstroke that's being made, where it's all society's fault, and there's no it's nothing to do with disability at all, and the impairment. And I just that is the irk with me. That's
I totally understand what you mean, because the one phrase that I cannot stand when it comes to disability is that only disability is a bad mindset. Because I just think you're completely washing over disability in itself. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big believer in mindset and having a positive mental attitude and being really able to take a holistic look at your life. But I feel like, that horrendous phrase, the only disability is a bad mindset. Well, actually, you're really sweeping under the rug a lot of societal problems, a lot of systemic problems that we have with our educational system, problems that we have with our political system. It's such a broad, and as you said, a complete brushstroke of completely forgetting about half of the issues that really are important. And when I see it being used, and particularly by people who are in the disabled community, I think in the nicest way possible, you need to have a step back, because if you feel like you can say that, I'm not necessarily sure you're aware of the problems that disabled people are facing. Because at that level, you're not. That this whole idea that we can fix everything by mindset. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a big believer in mindset. I do believe that there's a lot that can be cured, is the wrong word, but there's a lot that you can look at in your life and be appreciative for, and actually, your mindset will get you a lot further than if you just completely ignore it. But when we completely ignore and remove systemic issues and societal issues, then that in and of itself is a problem, because you're completely being like, you're completely washing away a lot of the reasons why people fight for what they fight for. And actually, there's a lot of privilege in being able to say that, because then you're not realizing that actually maybe the way that you're disabled is maybe not the way somebody else is disabled, which I think is always my point, is that actually disability is incredibly individual. And that
Yeah.
really ties in nicely to what you said, is that you will never be able to speak for an entire community, which is true, because I will never be able to speak for an entire community. We are both disabled, but we're both disabled in very different ways. But yeah, we are still both disabled. I feel like that
So I
was
hit the nail on the
really
head.
clever. I honestly feel like I've just been like, I've used all my brain power up in that sentence, I'm not gonna lie.
That's why I have a coffee on standby here, just to keep
Absolutely
me going.
fair.
But
Absolutely fair. I
bloody
wish I'd done
done.
the same. I actually have
Yeah.
a little cup of peppermint tea, which I feel is like really wholesome.
Lovely. Yeah. Fantastic.
So you have, I can't even say it properly, osteogenesis
Genesis
imperfecta.
imperfecta. Yay! That's it.
She's got it right. And so obviously that presents at a very, very young age. So
Yep.
with that, what was childhood and growing up, particularly considering it's your bones that are very fragile, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. I mean, childhood is pretty difficult because as a child, you're naturally moving around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You're very curious, and the majority of my fractures happened in my early years. So it was just a constant cycle of having broken bones in hospital,
Yeah.
rehab, physio to try and get back on my feet, because I was, walking up until about the age of 3, and then it was just like, using the chair full
Mm-hmm.
time. And yeah, I mean, like I would say in primary school it was great. When I got into secondary education and grammar school, it was tough.
Mm-hmm.
Bullied a lot, and I I think one of the things I always laugh about when I tell people is that getting my driving license, which the government, as you probably know, allow people to do at the age of 16 if you've got a disability, was the demise of my education. Because yeah, because after, I guess, if we're gonna, get me on the chaise long, and talk about the the psychological aspect of, where that comes from. It was obviously being cooped up in hospital for
Mm-hmm.
so long, and having that restriction. So as soon as I could get my independence, I was like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And there was like, that was the end of my education. I just was off to see the world.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I went back to business school. Did you know, did something with the charter industry marketing, and a number of years later, but was like, I was off, and I was away to Ibiza after school, and set up my first business shortly after that, and never looked back, sort of thing. So
I love that as well,
yeah.
because there's like a realization that actually the reason that you value freedom so much is because in younger years it was very much like broke a bone in hospital. Hospital means rehab. Rehab means time. Time means I'm here for quite a long time because it could happen in the next 2 minutes. And there's something really, really wonderful about having that own self-reflection, that you're like, oh, I can see as to why that part of my life and that part of my life mesh together equal that part of my life.
Yeah,
And obviously that, like,
sure.
that only comes with wisdom, right? Like, I've never met a 16-year-old who's like, yeah, like, I know why I do this because of this. Or if I have met them, I'm like, you haven't been a kid. Like, you did not enjoy childhood. Like, you reflected way too much.
Yeah, and that's it. Like I think everyone's got their own journey, and it's just, we're all navigating life in our own ways, and just trying to figure things out, and
Mm-hmm.
we do it in a way that is obviously based around our own circumstances. And I think one of the things that I always talk about is a guy called Andy Nairn, who runs an ad agency in London called Lucky Generals.
Mm-hmm.
His wife is MS, and he talks in his book, which is called Go Luck Yourself. And I'm not promoting it; I'm not on commission. But it's a great book if you're in that sort of industry. But he refers to people with disabilities as being more creative,
Mm-hmm.
because we are natural problem solvers. And I thought that was a really, that was a golden nugget, that I could relate to, and I'm sure many others relate to as well, in terms of just how we are so, and like, I'm gonna use the word resilient, but we, in terms of, but you know what I mean. We are though. I mean, I think when it comes to facing the barriers that we have head on and those different challenges, we are able to to navigate them and figure things out in a way that we can sort of get on some sort of level playing field. And you know, sometimes that comes obviously through the likes of an acquired disability, where it's a huge shock. But some of us are obviously born with disabilities, and we have that sort of bit more of a gradual path into the world of disability. But by and large, we seem to be able to figure it out and make things work.
Yeah, for sure. I was wondering, how has your disabilities, how did that impact your choices in career that you made? Or on the flip side, did it not even enter the conversation?
Yeah. Um, Hugely, because with
Hmm.
my disability, I've got like chronic fatigue, and it was always a case of trying to navigate any sort of business interest around my disability because of whatever could come around the corner. So it was always with that aspect of self-employment that I could
Hmm.
control the narrative. And it is difficult because when you're I guess faced with various different things like having debilitating fatigue, and
Hmm.
like I have suffered from depression years ago, and you know it hinders your success without
Yeah.
a doubt. There are even more challenges to overcome, and it's just, I think, in terms of then the physical aspect as well. So I mean, my career has moved from, um, I mean, it's been a very entrepreneurial journey from advertising. I was in hospitality for a while. I had a restaurant back in Belfast, and then sold it, set up my first production company, and have been in TV and film since. But I mean, for the years that I've been in and working across film, one of the big problems that I've always had is actually being a camera operator,
Hmm.
and that's one of the things obviously we're going to talk about today, which is sort of a nice
Yeah.
segue, no pun intended, talking about my wheelchair um, into. But you know, I have always said, like, you know, when if you do want to be a camera operator in TV and film, you you need four arms. You need two arms
Yeah.
to push yourself. If you're a manual chair, you need two arms to hold the camera. So, for me in particular, that was a real challenge, and it was something that I couldn't. So the main role in a TV production or
Hmm.
film set is called a DP or DOP, which is your director of photography, and they're the sort of main person who'd be involved in filming and controlling the film that's done, and sort of coordinating the team of camera operators.
Hmm.
But it's something that I've never been, I guess, authentically been able to take on, because you really need to be able to run over to the other side of the studio, like squeeze in between two people and get the shot.
Yeah.
And if you're using a wheelchair, you can't um, realistically do that.
Hmm.
And look, we are all very realistic about what we can and can't do. Like, I'm not going to be a gaffer and climb lights and install lights and climb up a scaffold and stuff like that, and there's
Yeah.
no interest in doing it anyway. But I think we're all realistic about what we can and can't do, and our
Hmm.
career choices really reflect that. So I did, I set upon trying to create something, a new technology that would um, enable me and others to really participate in that role,
Hmm.
in a job that just hasn't been possible before. So I have a Segway wheelchair that I've been using for a number of years now, called the Jenny,
Hmm.
and it's just amazing. I mean, it's based on the original Segway platform. So using that, I thought that there was an opportunity to sort of base, some sort of technology around it, because the fact that
Hmm.
you can sort of move your core to move forward and backwards, and it's very, very agile. It's got a very small footprint. And so I started working with a company in London, and we've now brought this project, to life, and we're at the final stages of now being able to bring this vision and make it a reality. And yeah, it's just like really, really exciting for me because I can see from so many people that I've been talking to, like Isaac Harvey
Yeah.
and others, who for them it will mean being able to participate in a way that they just haven't before. So, like for Isaac, for instance, we can actually adapt the system, and the way it works, you've basically got on the side of the chair, you've got you'll have a mount, and you'll have a gimbal. So we've all probably
Mm-hmm.
seen gimbals nowadays. We use them for phones and cameras and different things. So this is like a big gimbal that's used
Mm-hmm.
in Hollywood and various different other features and TV productions, and it essentially sits over the side, and it has a wireless control system. So there's a couple of ways to control it. You can control it with a monitor and a couple of handle grips. So you can actually control the movement of the camera, and you can control the focus on this one unit. But if you're in a bigger production, typically what you'll have is someone to, it's called pull focus. So you'll have someone who'll wirelessly control the focus of the camera,
Mm-hmm.
and then someone will have someone then to control the gimbal. So it means that Isaac can be using this in, for talk's sake, EastEnders.
Yeah.
And if he's like following, he's in control of his chair, and if he's basically filming then the talent that's walking down the street. You have those two separate operators that are controlling the camera and the focus. So he's sort of tasked with making sure that the camera is a uniform distance from him and the talent,
Mm-hmm.
and he's in control obviously of the whole system and the movement. So that, and I'm really excited to be able to get him to use this in a real world scenario because, as he said, and you've probably seen from the Karis video, that's the name of the system, Karis. Um, it's changing how he's interacting on set. He's no longer having to direct from the sidelines, and he can be an active part. And that's
Yeah.
where I see this growing. And being able to work with so many different people with different impairments. That it is going to be a game changer. And once we have this prototype built and developed, we're going to scale it up. So we're going to
Yeah.
get into Panavision, Warner Brothers. We're going to try and take this over to the States and LA and various different places. And it's going to make a huge difference. So it's just really exciting. But it's thanks to technology and where we're
Mm-hmm.
at, today that it's being made possible. So yeah.
I honestly, like, my first thought is how many more incredible disabled filmmakers are now going to be able to do what they want to do? Because at this point in time, like as you said, the technology, like it's kind of there, but it's not necessarily there. And I'm just, as you were talking about it, like obviously you're so lit up by it because it's so important, but how many more creatives, and as we've already said, disabled people are some of the most creative people in the world because we're natural problem solvers. It kind of becomes ingrained in you to a point where it's completely second nature. How many incredible disabled filmmakers or TV producers or people who want to be in some form of production, TV, film, whatever, or like even to the point when we're talking about like YouTubers, like how many more of these people are
Yeah.
we going to be able to see because of this? And that is incredible because like the creativity is there, and it hasn't been before, which just means that there's just going to be so many more disabled people who are going to be able to shine their own light. And I'm a big believer of that because I believe that everybody should be able to do that. But having the ability and creating something that's going to enhance that for someone else, I think is really, like, I think it's so invaluable because you know that like phrase, like, oh, like you've given someone their life back. It's almost like that because you're then bestowing a gift, and I don't mean gift as in like here's a freebie. I mean like here's a gift in terms of you have given someone something that they've wanted to do for so long, but society's not been able to help them do it, and you've got that product, and you can be like, here you go, sorted. You can now
Yeah.
use it, and you can now do what you want to do. That is
And
invaluable.
I think it's it's funny that obviously it takes for someone within the community to be able to do it because
Mm-hmm.
obviously you need that lived experience, and that's where it's really important for all various different people within our community to try and innovate, to try and
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of people are doing so many amazing things, and it's just trying to um see how we can make the world a better place for our community and for others. And this is going to translate into other areas. Obviously, I think that the fear I have is that the technology is going to be used by everyone and not just the
Yeah.
disabled community. However, the conversations I've had, there are a lot of people that are coming out and showing support for it. I mean, I've had widespread support across advertising, TV, and film for this, and a lot of people ready to get behind it. So, it's just a case that we're trying to fundraise at the moment to get the hardware that we need to build the prototype. And, once we have that, we'll be out, we'll be on set, we'll be, getting this in front of people and showing them the difference that it can make. And the thing I really like about it actually as well, Brooke, is that, there's a there's a sort of similar technology that camera operators are using at the moment called Steadicam. You may have seen these. So I'm not a football fan, but on football pitches, for instance, it's the most probably the easiest example I can give. But they sort of wear these camera operators would wear a vest, and there's like a big mechanical arm that come out of the vest, and that's designed to take the payload. So the camera would be on like a long sort of vertical stalk.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the Steadicam that this is going to actually give a competitive advantage over Steadicam operators because Steadicams need to have brakes factored in quite regularly because they're carrying so much weight.
Yeah.
And also one of the other things is that if you are, I mean, Steadicam is designed because of that sort of arm system to take out the y-axis movement. So that's if you're walking, basically it's eliminating that sort of up and down movement. If you have to run with a Steadicam, it's actually still going to be there. So you need to factor that in and edit that out in your post production.
Yeah.
But obviously using a chair that doesn't come into play at all. I mean, you've got the payload is just distributed across the wheelchair, so it means you've got a longer run time and you've got a very smooth method of operation because you're using an electric vehicle essentially.
Yeah.
And so that's where we've got a really good case to bring this technology forward and enable people with disabilities to get out there and prove to the world that we can do it.
Yeah. I also really love what you said about how it had to be someone within the community that created it. Because I think I can't remember who I was having this conversation with. So if this person has listened to us, thanks. I can't remember who you are, but the point that I'm about to make are valid because they kind of came from that conversation. And it was that as a disabled person, you have to kind of get really good with rejection quite quickly because the idea that you're going to have everything handed to you is completely like it's never going to work that way. But you kind of get used to doors slamming in your face quite quickly because it's just a regular part of life. And actually having that experience where like you yourself, you've gone through things and you've almost had that, like, I can see there's a problem and I can't fix it and I'm not necessarily sure how to fix it. And it's that like, okay, how do I make this better? How can I do this better? But nobody's helping me. And then to be able to create something that's going to better so many people is again like a really beautiful gift. And I love that because I think there's so much, like, as we've already said, we're really hammering this point home, but I think it's one that needs to be hammered home, is that there's so much is it ingenuity, one of the two of them, can't remember which one it is. There's so much ingenuity in disability that actually you don't really get creativity without disability, because you have to look at the world in a different way and you have to navigate the world in a different way, and that is invaluable. And like just having that experience of like, yes, it's not working out the way that I wanted to, or it's not going my way, but actually how can we make this better? Because ultimately, like, it's not just about making it better for you. There's a whole host of other people who this is going to benefit, and actually people down the line. I'm not talking about in like 2 or 3 months. I'm talking like 5, 10, 15 years. There are going to be people who build on that idea as well, and actually that in itself is like leaving a legacy, which I think I love. I'm a big believer of legacy, and I love that.
No, I completely agree. That's what really excites me. It's about trying to and bringing in others along the way. The likes of Isaac and other people within the community that we can really champion and as people who really want to get involved and show that it is possible. So yeah, I mean, I think I can very quickly see my role changing over the next couple of years into one of a trainer and going out with these film studios and different broadcasters and production companies to get the kit out there and train them how to use it. And And yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting in terms of how to now signal to the community that this is a new opportunity that you can partake in and you can engage.
Mm-hmm. So let's
So
talk about the disability paradox, because I've
okay,
watched it many a time and I loved it because I thought it was very, very truthful and very, very raw. And I, like, as I've already said, I'm not a big believer of like fluffing up disability. I think, don't get me wrong, I know my podcast is called Disabled and Proud, but there are some real life moments during that documentary. And I wondered, what was it that made you want to make it?
yeah, I think it was sort of final acceptance of my disability because
Mm-hmm.
I was told about earlier on about childhood and growing up in mainstream education. Um, I was never exposed to disability, believe
Mm-hmm.
it or not, at that sort of young age. And because I was growing up around friends who were able-bodied, and um, I knew that it was different. Obviously, I mean, and I knew I had a disability, but in terms of being really interconnected with the disabled community and
Mm-hmm.
accepting who I was, it didn't really ring true until I guess in my early 20s when friends were settling down, having sort of long-term relationships and getting married,
Mm-hmm.
having kids and stuff, and I was sort of left then behind. And even I did experience that in school, obviously. When friends were off playing football and stuff, and I was not able to, and there was I guess a moment in my late 20s when I sort of finally and even early 30s when I started to finally embrace it and
Mm-hmm.
sort of accept the fact. And I think it was only after that that I really was able to get myself into a place that I was able to um, do something like the disability paradox, talk openly about my
Yeah.
struggles with depression and try and see how others, because that was the thing. It was about it was a journey of exploration to understand how others felt, and it was so surprising to see how I was in fact very different because I was expecting a sort of similar theme that everyone was going to be really unhappy. um, but it was like to the contrary of that, and that's the thing with disability paradox. It was debunking this sort of thesis, which is claiming that, I mean, it is like the disability paradox states you should be if you have a disability you're going to be necessarily um happy. You should be have a high quality of life and happy with your life despite your disability. But it was really good, and I mean I think the thing for me is it painted a picture, and it was very relatable to everyone. So it doesn't matter if you
Yeah.
have a disability or not. I think that was the thing about the documentary, that it gives everyone this idea about how to find happiness, and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately for those that haven't seen it, I mean the conclusion is that you find happiness through so many different things, and it's a culmination of all these different aspects of life, whether that's a career, whether that's a relationship, family, and that was the thing that resonated from all the different contributors that we had
Mm-hmm.
on the program. So it was a really interesting journey. I'm very glad to have done it, and I think it was a very bold thing for BBC to embark on because
Yeah.
they at that time were very, and I know you've talked even, to like some Warren Stapley and about this sort of polarized view with the disabled community about superheroes, and it's
Yeah.
come up quite a bit. But that at that time when we were doing the disability paradox, that was the big theme. So for the BBC to have done and embarked on this and allowed us to tell that story, in terms of what it was and that rawness, as you say. Yeah, I think that you really have to be commended for it because it was getting away from that sort of polar opposite that we had all seen so much of. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
I loved it because it was such a truthful experience. And I really liked how there was a lot of it that was like intertwined with personal experience, but then there was also like the science as well, like in terms of you had psychologists on and you were speaking to people who are in universities and like London School of Economics, and I love, like, personally I love being able to match up like holistic well-being but also with some science behind it because I can see it. I'm very great if I can see something. If I can't see something and I can't track it, I'm a bit like, oh, like, where's your evidence? Like, if you can't track it, you can't change it. I'm very much like that. So I think that the way that it was done was, I really want to like thank you for it, because I was watching it and I've watched it a good few times because I think every time I watch it I get something different out of it.
Thank you.
And what I just love that it was so truthful, like you said, like it was a very much an exploration of how to find happiness, but also this idea of the disability paradox. And there was also like loads of different contributors who all kind of said similar things but also very different things as well, which is fascinating because you had someone like Brian, who I love him. He, like, oh my gosh, he is such a pure soul, talking about how like his relationship is amazing. And then you have someone like Sam Rank who is like, actually, I don't have that experience, and I suffer with dating, and I'm being very honest and open about it. And the two of them, again, like me and you, are disabled in completely different ways, but they're still disabled. And again, it's that different view, different voices. We all come from the same community, but we all have different opinions. And surprise, surprise, that is okay. You can be in the disabled community and not agree with a disabled person. That is fine.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's, I think one of the other shocking things in terms of the differences in disabilities, it was really, I mean, it was sort of heart wrenching to hear about Brian's story and his upbringing and the
Mm-hmm.
challenges that he had, and in terms of him being forced to wear prosthetics and things like
Yeah.
that as a child. They're trying to fix him, and I think that that's the really good thing to look at now. To take a snapshot of where we are. I mean, all things said and done, we're talking about language and all these different things. Um, we've, I genuinely think that we've never been in such a better time when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and how the disabled community are viewed, and the power that we have in terms
Mm-hmm.
of trying to influence and shape change in a positive way. And I don't think, saying that, because I, look back at Brian's story about how he was treated in the 50s, like
Yeah.
that's never going to happen again. And that's a really good and positive thing to sort of reflect on. But yeah, it was no, look, it was really great. Contributors were amazing, and yeah, I'm just really really glad to have done it. But obviously we've had so many other amazing documentaries from the community that have come out, and
Mm-hmm.
have been extremely powerful in helping change perceptions, and making the world view disability in a different way. And there's the I think that sort of fear aspect. I used to think, one of the points you made, it was actually again on Warren's podcast. You were talking about kids, and I think this is one of the problems that you know education is the next focus point in terms of making that inclusion happen, and showing children how disability is in society, because that's obviously one of the problems. And I keep I was in doing some training with Levi's and Manchester about a week ago, and I was talking about this story where a number of years ago in Belfast, I remember a little kid was getting out of the car, and he pointed. He goes, "Mommy, mommy, look at that tiny little man!" and the mother goes, "Get you in here!" And it was just
Yeah.
like that, very natural reaction. And obviously, kids being kids, and that really, it just highlights as like innocent and as kids are, and you can't blame them at all for their reaction when they see someone with disability. But it's because there's so little education about how disability. There's no normalization of disability that I can see happening in education. And I think if that is changed, if that's the next focus point, I think we'll make leaps and bounds when it comes to inclusion. Of the coming generations. In terms
Yeah.
of how we're viewed in society.
I
Um,
think that's such a valuable point. It's such a valuable point because kids are naturally so curious. And, like kids are taught that, well, they're not taught, but like when you look at a classroom of children, quite often there might be one disabled child. There's not really ever going to be more than 5 disabled children in one classroom, and so this idea that disability is not just one thing can really blow kids' minds. I mean, we're talking about people who are like 4 or 5 here, and you're so right. The sooner we have something in education that starts off younger, and talking about disability in a way that's accessible to them. Obviously, don't make them listen to this podcast. This podcast will go over their heads. There's a lot of technical terms. But if we do have something that is accessible for children so that they can learn about disability and it becomes more normalized, you're so right. It means that future generations and society in and of itself becomes a lot more accepting, a lot younger, which means that actually your acceptance is a lot quicker, because as we all know, the older you get, the harder it is to change. All that whole can't teach an old dog new tricks, blah 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 blah. But it's true. The younger that you start with things like disability, the easier it is to accept. And that's
for sure.
That's such an important point to take home, is that everyone at some point is going to experience disability. So start education young, because you won't get through this life unscathed or untouched by disability. Even if this doesn't touch you until you're 70, it's probably you that's become disabled because you're now old and frail and everything breaks. Or alternatively, you're old and that part of your body is not necessarily working as it used to, and therefore you're rendered disabled. That's how this world works now. We're living longer, so the lightness is you're going to be touched by disability yourself.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And it's fingers crossed. I mean, I don't have all the answers, but I think there's so much stuff that obviously from what we've been talking about today, that and obviously the amazing guests that you've had on, that you can see how there's a lot of positive stuff that's happening, and how the shape and the sort of landscape of the disabled community is changing. But yeah.
So, do you have a piece of advice for a younger version of you?
Oh. Oh dear. Well, I mean, ideally to go back and tell my younger self about all the accidents I'm going to have, and I'm going to end up in hospital, which is probably the most sensible thing.
Don't go here on this date, because you will break your leg and it will just take you ages to recover, and it's just not worthwhile.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much advice that I could give, because as I said, we're all just figuring it out, and my young self was very stubborn and independent, and I guess just on my own journey and on my own path, and determined just to sort of see it through, and whatever that may be. But I think definitely the accidents. Probably leave it at that. But
I love that. Genuinely,
that's philosophical.
Love that. I love that answer, because so many people are like, "Oh, back yourself and you can do it," and it can be quite a deep question. But I love the fact that you're like, "No, I'm going to tell myself all the accidents that just weren't worthwhile. That would really save me time, save me effort. It would be great."
Maybe a couple of winning lottery numbers as well for the future.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
On September 1992, this will be the lottery number on the Friday night, and you need to know this. Drum it into your skull.
That's it. Got to get the big one, like the 152 million jackpot, something like that.
So I like to think that through hardship we learn something about ourselves. And I was wondering, through hardship that you faced, is there a particular positive trait that you're proud of?
I think patience would be probably the biggest thing, and the ability to have, I hope I do, certainly a balanced view of the world, and not try and let your emotions sort of draw you in. you know, being, as I said, like for many people with my condition in particular, and anyone else, who has had to spend a lot of time in hospital as a result of their disability, that you get to understand patients and having patients.
Mm-hmm.
Now, saying that, if they've got a train that's missing or late, you know, I'm not patient in all areas of life, let's just say, but in terms of
Mm-hmm.
things that matter, and being able to sort of weigh up various different situations, and just take a bit of time before you sort of react and respond. I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned, and that comes like with all of us over time, just having experience and with age. But yeah, I think that's something from an early age that I sort of gleaned that I could probably most relate to.
Mm-hmm. I like to think about, or not think about, because that makes me sound like a bit of a weirdo. But quite often, as disabled people, we get asked really weird questions by the general public,
Yeah.
particularly relating to our disability. And I was wondering, is there a particular set that somehow keep appearing in your life? And if there is, do you have like your quick-witted answer that just comes out?
Oh yeah. All right. Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. So in my clubbing days back in Belfast before I moved to London, um, many years ago, I would always have been out and got asked by people, so mate, what happened to you? And I like if anyone is familiar about the troubles that happened back in Belfast, there's a lot of violence, paramilitaries, and all the
Mm-hmm.
rest. And my response 9 times out of 10 would be I would look them straight in the eye and I would say, I was shot. And they're looking, you, you were shot? Jeez. And they don't know where to look. And it is like it's just a golden moment um, that then they walk away. And it's the best thing just to, yeah. Um, but however, one time I remember this guy and all, the thing is that people always will come over and say, "Oh, look, mate, respect, so good to see you out. My father's uncle's brother's sister's dog was in a wheelchair once." It's that type of relatability that they're trying to engage conversation. I think it's funny. But there was this one guy in particular I remember. This was back in a nightclub called The Coach many years ago, probably about 2001, 2002, showing my age here. Um, and this guy is like probably in his mid mid 40s or so. Same sort of thing. Said he was in a wheelchair for a couple of weeks. He proceeds to pull up his shirt and shows me 7 bullet holes in his back where he'd been shot by paramilitaries. And I'm sitting there going, shit. So yeah, there's been a few interesting encounters along the way. That's
I can so imagine, like, at that point in time when you've been like almost riding his story without knowing him, and then you're like, oh, like, whoops.
yeah. Haven't got any of those, mate. But
Sorry, also told a
wow.
really good story, thanks.
Yeah. Um, but apart from yeah, so it's been typically that thing. But I think most people get that. There's often that aspect of relatability.
Yeah, for sure. I only have one last question for you, Chris, and I have
Sure.
genuinely loved this conversation. I think it's
Me too.
been super informative when it comes to the products that you're building, but also really truthful as well. And I think a lot of people are sometimes scared to be truthful about disability because they don't want to paint it with this negative brush. But actually, it's not necessarily about painting it with a negative brush. It's about being realistic, but also giving a 360 view rather than just this very, minor 90-degree view of what disability actually is. But my final question for you is, are you disabled and proud?
I am disabled and proud, Brooke. Yes. Um,
Oh, like I said, I've loved this conversation because it's been very, very truthful. And there's something to really be said in being truthful when it comes to disabilities. It's, as we've said, quite a lot of people will either fluff it up or they'll go to the other extreme where it's literally like you're on death's doorsteps and that's it, your life is over. And I've really appreciated the balance that we've been able to strike here, and just want to really thank you for being so open and honest about your journey, and I've loved it.
Thank you so much for having me on. I absolutely loved every minute of it, and so privileged to ask me to come on and chat with you today. So cheers, Brooke.
Oh, you're so
It's been
welcome.
amazing.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you.